Being fully human, God's image and God's story, the subtitle. I think being fully human is certainly a topic that I think is very relevant all the time. I think is going to become increasingly relevant over the coming weeks and months, as I think we need to almost like think more carefully and more deeply about what it means to be fully human. And there are, to me, two things about this title. One is that it's the title has been chosen to resonate with us in some ways. It certainly resonates with me. So we, with our aspirations, with our yearnings, with our desire to be the best we can be, for our lives to mean something. We don't want to waste our lives. We want to live to the full. For those of us who are God people, we want to be in the center of God's will. And so we, part of being human is to have a certain width and depth of experience. I think that is one thing that perhaps now currently is a little bit under threat, right? As at this time of anxiety and loss, we want to hold on to whatever it means to be fully human, as we almost like feel some of it being whittled away. So there's certainly that part of it resonates with us. Then I think there's also very much a little bit of a controversial element to the topic. So I don't know if you heard that in terms of being fully human. So some people might respond, does that mean not everyone is fully human? What do you mean? Do you mean there are degrees of humanness? Can you feel some of that? How dare you suggest I'm not fully human? Who are you to judge that? Who decides what human or what fully human is? So there's that sort of element that that comes out of that as well. So I thought, even just without further ado, that an opening question, a little bit of a word association, words that you would associate with being fully human. So give some single word, perhaps single line description of what being fully human means to you. So to be fully human is to, what would some of your answers be?
I think being connected with our neighbor.
Okay. Connection.
It's love.
Love.
As it says in 1 Corinthians 13. Hope.
Yes.
I suppose compassion and empathy, but they might be under love, but yeah.
Okay, compassion, empathy. Yeah, those are all relational qualities, but that's great.
Yeah.
Maybe also to fulfill the purpose that God has for your life.
Okay, so something around purpose.
Who's speaking?
It's Michael here. What about the fact that we have a soul?
Okay, and what does that mean?
It differentiates us from other beings on Earth.
Okay, so it's something that qualitatively distinguishes us from the animals, basically.
Yes.
Okay.
Hi, it's Roland here. For me, it's experience, to experience things through our senses.
I think it's a belief that it goes with the soul, that there's a part of us that is immortal.
Okay. Is it helpful that I type this, or do you not? Okay. Achieving our full potential as a person, doing good, doing the right thing. Okay, so potential.
I suppose still under relationship, but specifically relationship with God. Yes, I think that's a uniquely human feature.
Okay. Relationship with God. Okay.
Thorsten, perhaps being reasonable or thinking abstract.
Okay, so reasoning, abstract thought, etc. That's great.
Thorsten, it's Rory. How's it? I think that also having having our free will, even though God gave us free will, having free will makes us human.
Okay, having free will, that's great. I think we can, these are awesome answers. I remember also asking my son this, and he offered things like hope as well, like growth. Now, here's the thing. All these answers are really fantastic answers. What happens, though, is that in at least some of the answers, people will fill those answers with almost like with different meanings. So, so what does it mean, for example, relationship or even love? Okay, what is love? Is it a feeling? Is it a duty? What does it involve? Free will, but free will towards what? How do we use that free will? Different people will use it in different ways. So what does freedom mean? There's at least 2 political parties in our country that have the word freedom in their name, and they probably mean very different things. And the reason they mean very different things is that I think the storylines that they live in, or that they believe that they're living in, are quite different. So to me, one of the key things that we need to resolve in terms of what it means to be fully human is to first ask, what kind of a story are we living in? And because it's the story that we're living in that's actually going to, in many ways, determine how we fill the meaning of some of these words. So how are we going to use our reasoning or our curiosity? What sort of experiences are we looking for? What is the soul? There may be very different answers to that as well. Does that make sense? So it's almost like it's hugely important that we answer the question, what story are we living in? How should we, because that is going to tell us how do we treat each other, or what is it about a human that warrants good treatment? What constitutes progress? What do we mean with fulfilling our potential? What does justice mean? How are we qualitatively different from animals or from computers? So it's hugely important that we able to locate which story we are living in, because it's that story that's going to answer those questions for us. And so the story I want to offer is God's big story. This is the large storyline of the Bible. It's a really big story, right? And this is basically the overall story arc of the Bible in 4 chapters. Creation, fall, redemption, eternity. So very briefly speaking, creation, God makes us, and he makes us fully human. And then the fall, we then move away from God's blueprint of what it means to be fully human. We actually damage our humanity as we move away from him and from God's design. And then redemption, the story of God coming to us as one fully human, and coming to redeem us to himself and to restore the fullness of our humanity. And that is partially now and fully one day. So that last block is in the future. It's future tense, but it matters now. Actually, all 4 blocks matter now. So we do live in a particular point in that story. We are somewhere here, somewhere towards the end of the redemption block, but we feel the effects of all 4 of those blocks. And so if we want to understand what it really means to be fully human, we need to understand all 4 of those. Now today it's out of scope for me to try and convince you that this is the true storyline. That would be a subject for another day. So for today, I would just invite you to almost like have a look inside the story and look what things might look like if it turned out that the story were true. And my thesis this morning is that this is the very best story to be human in. It's the one that best brings out our fullest humanity. And notice what I'm not saying. I'm not saying we're human beings and this story helps us to enhance our humanity a bit. I'm saying something more. I'm saying there is no humanity without the story or outside of the story. because it's a really big story, and everything that happens inside of the story. And so even as we go on into coming weeks and months, not even this coronavirus happens outside of God's story. And I think it's important that able to locate ourselves and everything that happens inside of that story. I think it will shape, and very positively shape, how we deal with the days to come as well. Okay, I'm hoping I'm making sense so far. Now today, I'm just going to be looking at the creation part of that story. I do have, if this works and if this is interesting, I actually do have a part 2 and a part 3 to that. So we can go through the rest of the storyline, fall, redemption, perhaps another week. But today, all I'll be looking at is the creation part of the story, because it's such an important part of the story. Now, God's story is first of all, is the story about God. But secondly, it's also the story about the image of God. Stella was mentioning it already. So it's very much out of the creation account, certainly, but throughout the storyline, the story of the image of God. Where did it come from? What happened? How can it be restored? What is our hope? And the Bible teaches that humans are made in the image of God, and that this is the most fundamental fact about people. It's what makes a human human. God makes us fully human in his image. I'll get to the verse that I got that from now. And the intent is human well-being, is human flourishing in relationship with God, in relationship with each other. The image of God, that's something, as I think we know, is something the Bible only uses about human beings. Other life forms are according to their kind, but only for humans, God reflects and he declares his intentions. He announces beforehand what he's going to do. It's almost like he's spent a whole lot of time creating a habitable space to offer hospitality for us. And then there's a sense of when he creates human beings, this is the pinnacle of creation, kind of like now for the main event type of thing. Only humans are formed hands-on, not just spoken into existence. So God doesn't just say, let there be people, or let the earth bring forth humans. He actually has that personal touch. He gets his hands dirty. He breathes life into us. I don't do Hebrew, but I'm told the Hebrew word for image has something to do with to carve. It's actually the same word as is used for idols later in the story, and we can pick that up in a few minutes' time as well. I find that quite interesting. But the point there being, it's it's something carved out. It's something separate. It's something more than just a mirror image. It's something more than a photograph of. It's something that has existence in itself in some ways. And then occurrences of the image of God. It's interesting that it's not actually used that often. Apparently only 3 times in the Old Testament do we come across the phrase image of God. But what we can say is that the image of God, even if it's not used frequently explicitly, it's certainly implied and assumed on almost every page of the Bible. Okay, whenever the Bible speaks of any ethic, of how we treat each other, it assumes the image of God. And later on in the story, it's something that is called or termed shalom. Lisa Sharon Harper, in her book, The Very Good Gospel, defines shalom as when the image of God is recognized and protected and served and cultivated in every human being. I really love that. So when the image of God is recognized, protected, served, and cultivated in every human being, that's when we have shalom. Now, what's, I suppose, an interesting exercise is to try and sort of figure out, what is a human being made up of? I remember when I was 17 years old and just become a Christian, I really wanted to know this. Slice us up, tell me exactly what's what. And there's, as you can see on your screen, there are different ways that people have tried to describe us. And I suppose there's some value in doing that, but I think we need to be careful that we don't try and sort of, I don't know, almost like reductionistically carve ourselves up in that way. So I think one of the dangers is, I don't think, you know, you can slice a human being up in that way. You know, we consisting of, I don't know, 2 or 3 or 4 parts, and it looks something like this. That inevitably ends up being reductionistic, especially, think about it, if we then put, I don't know, spirit or spiritual as one of the slices. Does that mean that the rest of us is not spiritual? You see the problem. So I don't think when we try and sort of analyze what are we as human beings, I don't think this is the right model. Perhaps a more accurate one is to show something like, or to see it as something like this. So there's, you know, perhaps different angles from which we can look at ourselves or each other, different facets, different lenses through which we can see ourselves. But it's never just only the one thing and not the other. It's always a mix, and perhaps that is a better model. And so as I now introduce what my model is for this morning, that is kind of where I'm going. So here's the model. To me, the key thing about being fully human is to be made in the image of God. And these are the 3 things that I would offer this morning that form part, or that involve being made in the image of God. Now, I haven't seen this anywhere. I'm just trying to put together what some other people have said. Sometimes people just use 1 or 2 of these. I'm bringing out relationship explicitly because it's so important. Many people put it under the other 2. But here's basically where I'm coming from. If this is a little bit too small on your screens, I think if you're on a smartphone, you can also pinch zoom if you want. But this is the famous text of God making us in his image in Genesis 1. And so God said, let us make mankind in our image. And then also verse 27, so God created mankind in his image. So he names us, okay? So man, humanity, Adam, whatever your translation is. But given an identity, he identifies us. He names us. So that's where I get the identity bits from. Then the dominion bits, let us make man in our image, in our likeness, so that they may rule over the fish in the sea and the birds in the sky. Okay, so there's an immediate purpose associated with that. So, you know, dominion is a bit of a Bible word. I suppose you could simplify that triangle by just speaking of being and doing and relating. So dominion is about our agency. It's about our purpose. Again, God makes us in our image, and then immediately after he does so, in verse 28, he blesses them and says, be fruitful, increase in number, fill the earth and subdue it, rule over the fish of the sea, etc. Okay, so there's your dominion mandate right there. And then relationship, possibly a first hint of God being triune even here. Let us make mankind in our image. Certainly God reflecting within himself. And then us being made in his image as them, not just as singular, but also as them, male and female. He created them. So certainly part of what it means to be made in God's image is to be made as them, not just as individuals, but also as community. So that's where I get the triangle from, if that makes sense. Do you want to throw something at me at this point? Does this make some sense? The rest of the talk, I'll go into each of those 3 a little bit.
Fred here, but
Yes.
fully agree. I love the dynamic of the triangle you've created. I think it speaks of deep intimacy that God designed and intended with our human parents. And I think then it leads to that wonderful exploration, discovery journey of how do we experience true intimacy with God and with our fellow humans.
Thank you.
Thorsten, Marcel, the fundamental assumption is you've got to make that God's the good guy here, that he really loves us, cares for us, and wants the best for us. That's why he created us, and I think that's very important.
Okay. I do make a lot of assumptions, many of which not stated. So thank you for highlighting that one. It is important. also make the assumption that the story that we're living in, creation, fall, redemption, renewal, isn't just a true story. It's also a good story. Okay? It's the story that allows us to be most fully human. It's a story that of great love and care. It's a story of redemption. It's a story of fullness. It's a story of hope. I'm making all those assumptions in a way. Yes, thank you.
Nduluma here. I love it, Thorsten. I love the triangle. Love the explanation. It's really good. I relate to it, and I love how you've decompartmentalized, if you will, the identity, relationship, and so on, and you just made it like a mosaic that's fluid, because we're all at any given point we have to deal with identity, we have to deal with relationship, and we have to deal with the other components. So it just moves in and out of each other. I love it.
Thank you, Nduluma. Okay, let me move on. Let me go to each of those three. Perhaps I should also do a little bit of a source acknowledgement. Some of my ideas come from a guy at Labrie, Ben Kais. I can give you the reference of that as well. He's put a podcast out on what it means to be human. So some of what I'm saying here is also based on some of his excellent insights. So the first part of the triangle, let's start with the dominion bit. So that they may rule. I think we've said that there's a sense of purpose and responsibility in that. And by the way, rule meant positively here. I think in our current world, some of us hear rule, and all we can hear is abuse. It's not meant that way, right? It's meant in a very positive way, in the best possible way. Same as responsibility. To some ears that may now sound as something burdensome. It's not meant that way. It's meant to be an exciting, purposeful, energizing, creative type of thing. And the concept of dominion, it's a royal task, right? It's the king delegating his authority to sub-regions, so to speak. So we're talking about taking care of, ruling on behalf of, stewardship, agency, nurturing, not exploiting, ensuring the well-being of human beings and the well-being of creation. I know that's sometimes difficult, but I think it's a both and. Theologians sometimes talk about sub-creation. So basically God creates the macro reality, the space in which we live. And then within that, we rearrange the raw materials that God has given us. That's part of what it means to be human. And we rearrange it for human flourishing. That is sub-creation. So basically, dominion is capacity and what we do with that capacity, our human agency. And this dominion thing is also sometimes called the cultural mandate, or perhaps the cultural blessing. The idea of saying, here, go and live into your image-bearing nature. And there's a huge role of culture there, isn't there? Culture as an expression of care, and within that, I think it allows for a huge amount of diversity, different personalities, different cultures, and in different contexts. So doing the dominion thing in Greenland is going to look a little bit different from doing it in the Amazon jungle, or in rural Eastern Cape, or in the concrete jungle that we're in here. So there's just a huge diversity, I think, that's also possible through that. Now, people have spent a lot of thought and had a lot of fun and a lot of serious work, I think, as well, in terms of trying to figure out, well, what does it mean to be made in the image of God? What makes us uniquely human? And here are, you can read them, some possible examples of the type of capacities that people have come up with to say, this is, now I've put my finger on it, this is what it means to be made in the image of God. This is what it means to be fully and uniquely human. And you can see there's certainly some value in that. Let's quickly go through them. Rational thought, being functional, being able to, sequence and categorize and recognize cause and effect, being able to see and appreciate beauty, make art, envision different realities. So the whole use of the imagination, symbolic language, being able to make choices intentionally to impact the world around us, to also to handle adversity, I think, in that. This idea of self-awareness, this consciousness of ourselves. You mentioned some of this in the brainstorm at the beginning, our capacity for empathy and kindness and heroism and hospitality, our ability to tell jokes and to find them funny. Culture making is a huge one. Our desires and our longings, so whether that's for adventure, whether that's for security, our longings for transcendence and meaning. Relationship, love, I haven't put that in that list because remember I've highlighted that separately a little bit further down the road. So, I mean, all this is pretty useful. There's one potential issue and important caveat to that, of course, is that these capacities cannot be the only way that we think about the image of God. So in all of these things in the list, we resemble God more than we resemble the animals. But this cannot be the only way that we can think about the image of God. Striving to image God, image used as a verb, is something we are called to do. But here's the thing. What about people who, I don't know, when we differ drastically in our gifts and abilities and capacities? Or if I'm less creative than you, does it mean I'm less human than you? What about the person with a debilitating illness? Okay, what about the newborn baby, which really just displays nothing except needs? What about now, as we sort of kind of like in lockdown because of a virus? Okay, does it mean we are now suddenly less human in some way? So can you see the issue with just having the capacities lens only? The other important thing just to note is, as far as I can see, the Bible does not provide us with a list of capacities in which we image God. It sort of seems to remain deliberately enigmatic or silent about that. It doesn't say, look, here are the 3 ways in which we, or the 3 things we can do to image God. It doesn't go there. So human abilities can be a pointer to the image, but the image exists even in the absence of such pointers, or even when there might even be evidence to the contrary. I'm hoping that makes sense, right? It's only because we are made in the image of God that we can do certain things, but the image of God does not consist of these things. This cannot be the full picture. So there is a need for seeing something more than dominion in the image of God. So moving on to identity. So this is where we now use image as a noun. We are God's image, noun, irrespective of how well we image God, verb. It's something we are. It's not just something we do or something we have. It's part of our very essence. And it's a source of intrinsic value and worth and dignity. It's something that's very much embedded in us and something that can't be extinguished. One of the things that's, I think, hugely important to note is that the image of God is reaffirmed after the fall, both Old Testament and New Testament. I can give you the scriptures if you want. So we are in the creation part of the story, but just about everything we're looking at today remains true even after the fall. So even after we mess it up, it gets a little bit more complex and a little bit more messy, but a lot of what we're saying this morning remains true. So the image of God can't be extinguished. It's perhaps a little bit like a flame at the core of our being that can't be put out. It goes all the way down. I forget who that quote is from, but I love that sort of that metaphor, this idea of something going all the way down. It's not just an aspect of your identity. It is your identity. It's the most fundamental thing about who we are. So other things about us are very important. Race or culture or gender or our values. But at that level, there are important differences amongst human beings, which we can't ignore and which we do need to appreciate. But every human being shares something with you that's even weightier than those differences. I hope I'm not getting into hot water by saying that. It's the image of God that goes all the way down in a way that perhaps all the other things, as important as they are, do not. The image of God is a given in the sense of it's given by the giver. It's not something that is self-generated. That's also important. Okay? So in a worldview of be whoever you want to be, it actually takes us to a different place than image of God, doesn't it? It's not something conferred by other people. It's something that's given by God. We are in his image because he says so. And it's not just a sort of a designation. It's something he decided we should be before creating us, right? So God doesn't just sort of go, oh, look what I've done here. They're like me in some ways, therefore they're in my image. He purposes that from the start. It's something he creates us to be. It's also not bestowed on different people in different degrees. Ben Kai says, you either have it or you don't. And if you're a human being, you have it. And so you can see how the image of God is actually also a huge equalizer, because it elevates the weak, the seemingly insignificant. It also, I think, forbids the rich and the powerful from placing themselves above others. It's a huge equalizer amongst us. We all made in God's image. And it offers, I think, as a result of that, it offers a hugely robust sense of our humanity. And that I really need that very robust sense of humanity in order not to disqualify people from that humanity. If you're being nice to me, then it's easy for me to be nice to you back. But if you're behaving like, I don't know, a lower life form, what is going to prevent me from seeing you in the answer is image of God, right? And so that's why I'm really, it's so important for us to hold on to this image of God thing. It's a much stronger thing than survival of the fittest as a storyline. That's not going to help us in terms of how we treat each other, or in terms of treating each other well. Or guys, we have 99 point something % of the same DNA, so let's all get along. Can you see how that doesn't quite cut it nearly as much as image of God does? Because next thing is somebody pipes up, yeah, but we also have 90-something % the same DNA as a cockroach, and where does that take us? So and even I am because we are. I am a person through other people. It takes us closer, but it doesn't actually quite take us where the image of God takes us, because somebody might say, yeah, but what you're saying is on my own, I'm an insignificant worm, but together we're a can of worms, and that has great value. You see the problem with that? So even I am through others doesn't quite take us there. It's a little bit circular as well. So any in-group and out-group type of understanding, which we have across the world, is just not going to take us there. Where we have an in-group and an out-group, and different rules apply a little bit. So we treat each other inside a little bit different, like we would treat somebody outside. And there's something we would do for people on the inside that we wouldn't do for people on the outside. You see how image of God, because we are all in his image, actually almost like blows away those boundaries in the most amazing way. So that's the identity thing. So here's an attempt. I'm not yet 100% sure about that, but to sort of try and show how identity is a bit of a complex thing. And there is a given aspect to it. Identity as given by God, as derived from God. But then there's also a fluid part of it, where we to some extent we are able to shape aspects of our identity. Others shape it. Our context shapes it. Let's be real. That's what happens. Okay, where we grow up and what family we grow up in, etc., does shape our identity. But there's that sort of that foundational part about our identity that is unchangeable, that is given by God, that is derived. So at the bottom level, there's something about image of God, about our humanness, that cannot be reduced, that cannot be extinguished. But then And especially, I think, as we move along the story and also introduce sin into it, there is also a part of our identity where we can meaningfully talk about growing or being diminished. At the bottom level, we are always fully human. That is not in doubt. That is not in jeopardy. We have worth. We have dignity. We have value. But when it comes to expressing that humanness, it can get a little bit more messy. And so, we can express that full humanness that we've been given in partial ways, in good ways and bad ways, or anything in between. So again, I'm hoping that makes sense. So there's a givenness part to our identity, but then there's also a fluid part to it as well. But whatever fluidity exists cannot destroy what we've been given at the base level. And so that was identity. Let me move on to relationships, so that we still have a little bit of time for Q&A as well. So in terms of relationship, the image is relational. A relational God welcomes us to his garden, to his planet. He offers hospitality to us. He makes us in his image as relational beings for relationship with him, with each other. A bit later in the story, that's then termed love God, love neighbor. And perhaps that's our most important capacity. Notice the link to dominion there. Perhaps our most important capacity is our capacity for relationship. And most important here is our capacity to respond to God. I think that's certainly true. Male and female, he created them. That's not just about marriage. I think that's clear as well. It doesn't mean that if you're single, you're less fully human, or that you need to bear children before you're fully human. Just think about it. If we fast forward in the storyline a bit, and if we look at Jesus, the one we hold up as the one fully human, that Jesus never married, never had kids. So fully human can't have to involve those things. And then also, I think clearly identity and dominion have an individual and a communal aspect. So we have a individual and communal identity as well as dominion. We do this dominion thing with each other. And so that's why I'm sort of bringing out relationship as a separate item, because it's so important. And then, your neighbor. Your neighbor is an image bearer. Here's a thought that I've heard on one or two occasions. Let me try and communicate it. I think it's a very a powerful idea. So I said before, the Hebrew word for image is the same as that for used for idol. And in the ancient Israel context, so many of the surrounding nations and surrounding religions had images of their deity in their temples. So they all had their temples, and it was full of these carved images. And then you went into the temple of Yahweh, and there was no image. Why? Now, one reason, of course, is that God can't be reduced to a part of his creation. But another reason, perhaps, is that God has already given you his image, his likeness, his representation. It's human beings. It's your neighbor. And so, in that sense, to honor God properly involves honoring our neighbor properly. And I think that's why love God and love neighbor are so closely connected. In the other religions, right worship would involve showing proper respect to the idol, to the image. And so for us, right worship involves showing proper respect to his image, which is his neighbor. And to mistreat the image is a little bit like mistreating the deity. Does that make sense? I love that idea. It's a very, I think, powerful idea. So, for example, in Matthew 25, Jesus goes, whatever you did for one of the least of these, you did for me. I could probably name other scriptures, but just to leave it at this one. So, here's where we've been. So I've tried to give the overall storyline, and then I've just zoomed into the creation part and tried to unpack a key idea of the creation narrative, which is being made in the image of God, and just trying to unpack a little bit what that looks like. I'm done. Throw something at me. Don't forget to unmute and then remute.
Hi, this is Cheryl, and I just
Cheryl.
want to say well done. And it's been very enjoyable. Your graphics have been very helpful, and I really like this last part about the image of God and the sort of switching and thinking about the idol, but how, let's say, secular people view that image, but then how God is asking us to view our neighbors as his image. That is just profound. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Cheryl. Okay, we've
Nduluma
also-
here.
Yes.
Really, really good, Thorsten. And, like in 1 John 4, verse 20, it talks about if anyone says, I love God, yet hates his brother or neighbor, he is a liar. For anyone who does not love his brother or neighbor, whom he has seen, cannot love God whom he has not seen. So, it just looks like there's a mandate to express our love for God through loving our neighbor. And I think at this time, when people are, when we are sort of in the throes of this pandemic as well, we need to ask ourselves what that's going to look like, how to display compassion, and how to display empathy and love in this time. So it's a really important thing to wrestle with.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And one of the the human capacities, part of being fully human in God's image is that we also have creativity. So we're trying to come up with creative solutions like what we're doing now to find different ways of being able to connect with each other. Whoever invented Zoom did a very creative thing, and they have done us a huge service, haven't they? Through their creativity, they've allowed us just to express our humanity a little bit better than we would otherwise be able to.
The notion of the image of God is really the foundation for social justice. And I think often it's the Marxist materialists who have claimed social rights as a right to replace God. But in fact, the foundation of it is the image of God.
Yes. And certainly one could, thank you for highlighting that. I think one could, well, if we do a part 2 to that, I would bring some of that out in the fall part of the story as well. Just the huge connection between image of God and justice, very much so, how we treat each other. And
yes, right.
Yeah. Thank you.
So it's Jenny here.
Yes.
I think it's very powerful, just as you sort of pointed out about the image of God. It is awesome. And then just as Roger sort of pointed out in the justice system, because if you get, like I was at TGIF with Cheryl and Itai, and we were talking about people who were in history were monsters, and so, but those people are still in the image of God, and it just, I think, highlights so much our fallen state. And yet the most amazing thing is that we all are made in the image of God. And you get unbelievers and you get believers, and we still all fall short of the glory of God, and yet we are made in the image. And it's really something to deeply contemplate and think about is the image of God. And I thank you for highlighting that in the Genesis story. Thank you.
Thank you, Jenny.
I just wanted to say, this is so fascinating to me. I've got a very good friend in the States who actually passed away yesterday from cancer, and her overriding drive all her life was to protect animals, and she totally and utterly believed that every animal is what she called a sentient being, and that for us to consider ourselves superior to them, you know, that absolutely used to break her heart on a continuous basis. So it's really, really interesting that, you know, we're having this discussion now, because I think there's a lot of people on this planet who think like that. And that's got to be a huge differentiation between many, many millions of people and those who believe we are made in the image of God.
Yes. And the thing about the image of God, though, is it doesn't in any way reduce the importance of everything else that God has created. So animals, the environment, part of dominion is to take proper care of. So I don't think we need to almost like reduce what it means to be human in order to properly take care of everything else in creation, including animals, and to value animals.
Thorsten, it's Jenny here again, because it's very interesting when you read Genesis that God blessed the birds and, you know, that little chunk, I think, when he made I don't know whether it was the third day or the fourth day, but he actually blessed the birds and the big things in the sea. So he blessed those animals. So I think that it just said what you've said, is that in no way are animals are diminished. And, you know, his spirit hovered over the waters. You know, so it's all there in Genesis. Genesis is the most amazing book, you know, that first chapter, the second chapter. But thank you.
Yeah. And having said that, there's also the flip side to that, is that it will become, I think, increasingly important for us to know that we are in some ways qualitatively different from both the animals and the robots, you know, in the increasing artificial intelligence developments. It's going to become increasingly important that we're actually able to hold on to humanity as something that is unique. Should read some of the comments as well.
Thorsten?
Yes.
Hi, Nduluma here. So this, I'd love if you have a second part to this, or third even. I'd like you to handle this particular question. So I'm throwing out a challenge at you.
Okay.
So when Christ came through, and that's the redemption part of the story, right? Did he redeem all of creation, or was it just man? In other words, so more technically, if you think of the state of animals, have they just always been on a constant, and only man fell? And obviously, we understand through the consequence of that he tainted humanity and the rest of creation. But the state of animals, I mean, did they fall with man, or because he was responsible for them, or were they on a constant, and was it just a man who fell, and then the redemption applies to redeeming man, so that the state of everything else was pretty much in equilibrium?
Right. Yeah. Thank you. Okay, that's not an easy one. I think Nduluma, you will have probably in the last week or two, or when we still had, you know, remember the days when we had live in-person TGIF. You would have had some speakers that probably went. The fall is actually just humanity and not nature. I think so. That's probably one where Christians would disagree. I still very much lean towards that the fall affected all of creation in some way. And then certainly when Jesus comes to redeem, he doesn't just come to, I don't know, export souls into some other place. I think he's, if you think about it, if his creation's really, really big, and if the fall is really, really big in the sense that it affects all of us and all of creation, then redemption, when we get to that part of the story, can't suddenly be the small thing. It's got to be at least as big as creation was in the first place. So that's where I would be leaning. But thank you. Yeah. So if we do a part 2 and a part 3, I should include that. Thanks.